The Tale of Sinoway. The Tale of Sinoway. The hereditary prince and count, governor of the domains of the sovereign in the lands of Tesetiu, true acquaintance of the king, beloved of him, the henchman Sinoway, he says: I was a henchman who followed his lord, a servant of the royal harem, attending on the hereditary princess, the highly praised royal consort of Sesostris, in the pyramid town of Kenem Esot, the royal daughter of Amenemnes, in the pyramid town of Ka Nofru, even Nofru the revered. In year 30, third month of inundation, day 7, the god attained his horizon, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Sehetepre. He flew to heaven and was united with the sun's disk. The flesh of the god was merged in him who made him. Then was the residence hushed, hearts were filled with mourning, the great portals were closed, the courtiers crouched head on lap, the people grieved. Now his majesty had dispatched an army to the land of the Temhi, and his eldest son was the captain thereof, the good god Sesostris. Even now he was returning, having carried away captives of the Tehanu, and cattle of all kinds beyond number. And the companions of the royal palace sent to the western border to acquaint the king's son with the matters that had come to pass at the court. And the messengers met him on the road. They reached him at time of night. Not a moment did he wait. The falcon flew away with his henchmen, not suffering it to be known to his army. Howbeit message had been sent to the royal children who were with him in this army, and one of them had been summoned. And lo, I stood and heard his voice as he was speaking, being a little distance aloof, and my heart became distraught, my arms spread apart, trembling having fallen on all my limbs. Leaping, I betook myself thence to seek a hiding place, and placed me between two brambles, so as to sunder the road from its traveller. I set out southward, yet purposed not to approach the residence, for I thought there would be strife, and I had no mind to live after him. I crossed the waters of Mawati, hard by the sycamore, and arrived in island of Snofru. I tarried there in the open fields, and was afoot early when it was day. I met a man who rose up in my path. He showed dismay of me and feared. When the time of supper came, I drew nigh to the town of Gu. I ferried over in a barge without a rudder, by the help of a western breeze, and passed by the east of the quarry in the district mistress of the Red Mountain. I gave a road to my feet northward, and attained the wall of the prince, which was made to repel the Setu and crush the sandfarers. I bowed me down in a thicket, through fear lest the watcher on the wall for the day might see. I went on at time of night, and when it dawned I reached Petni. I halted at the island of Kemwer. An attack of thirst overtook me. I was parched, my throat burned, and I said, this is the taste of death. Then I lifted my heart and gathered up my body. I heard the sound of the lowing of cattle, and espied men of the Setu. A sheikh among them, who was aforetime in Egypt, recognized me, and gave me water. He boiled for me milk. I went with him to his tribe, and they entreated me kindly. Land gave me to land. I set forth to Byblos. I pushed on to the Kedmi. I spent half a year there. Then Enshi, son of Amu, prince of upper retinue, took me and said to me, thou farest well with me, for thou hearest the tongue of Egypt. This he said, for that he had become aware of my qualities, he had heard of my wisdom. Egyptian folk who were there with him had testified concerning me. And he said to me, wherefore art thou come hither? Hath aught befallen at the residence? And I said to him, Sehetebre is departed to the horizon, and none knoweth what has happened in this matter. And I spoke again, dissembling. I came from the expedition to the land of the Temhi, and a report was made to me. And my understanding reeled. My heart was no longer in my body. It carried me away on the path of the wastes. Yet none had spoken evil of me. None had spat in my face. I had heard no reviling word. My name had not been heard in the mouth of the herald. I know not what brought me to this country. It was like the dispensation of God. Then he said to me, how shall you land fare without him, the beneficent God, the fear of whom was throughout the lands like Sachmet in a year of plague? Spake I to him and answered him, of a truth his son has entered the palace, and has taken the inheritance of his father. A God is he without a peer, none other surpasses him. A master of prudence is he, excellent in counsel, efficacious in decrees. Goings and comings are at his command. It is he who subdued the foreign lands while his father was within his palace, and reported to him what was ordered him to do. Valiant is he, achieving with his strong arm, active, and none is like to him. When he is seen charging down on Ro Petiu, or approaching the melee, a curber of horns is he, a weakener of hands. His enemies cannot marshal their ranks. Vengeful is he, a smasher of foreheads. None can stand in his neighborhood. Long of stride is he, destroying the fugitive. There is no ending for any that turn his back to him. Stout of heart is he, when he sees a multitude. He suffers not sloth to encompass his heart. Headlong is he when he falls upon the Easterners. His joy is to plunder the Ro Petiu. He seizes the buckler, he tramples under foot. He repeats not his blow in order to kill. None can turn his shaft, or bend his bow. The Petiu flee before him as before the might of the great goddess. He fights without end. He spares not, and there is no remnant. He is a master of grace, great in sweetness. He conquers through love. His city loves him more than itself. It rejoices over him more than over its God. Men and women pass by in exultation concerning him now that he is king. He conquered while yet in the egg. His face has been set toward kingship ever since he was born. He is one who multiplies those who were born with him. He is unique, God-given. This land that he rules rejoices. He is one who enlarges his borders. He will conquer the southern lands, but he heeds not the northern lands. He was made to smite the Setiu, and to crush the sandfarers. Send to him, let him know thy name. Utter no curse against his majesty. He fails not to do good to the land that is loyal to him. Said he to me, of a truth Egypt is happy, since it knows that he prospers. But thou, behold, thou art here. Thou shalt dwell with me, and I will entreat thee kindly. And he placed me open before his children, and mated me with his eldest daughter. He caused me to choose for myself of his country, of the best that belonged to him on his border to another country. It was a goodly land called Ya'a. Figs were in it, and grapes, and its wine was more abundant than its water. Plentiful was its honey, many were its olives. All manner of fruits were upon its trees. Wheat was in it, and spelt, and limitless cattle of all kinds. Great also was that which fell to my portion by reason of the love bestowed on me. He made me ruler of a tribe of the best of his country. Food was provided for me for my daily fare, and wine for my daily portion, cooked meat, and roast fowl, over and above the animals of the desert. For men hunted and laid before me in addition to the quarry of my dogs. And there were made for me many dainties, and milk prepared in every way. I spent many years, and my children grew up as mighty men, each one controlling his tribe. The messenger who fared north or south to the residence tarried with me, for I caused all men to tarry. I gave water to the thirsty, and set upon the road him who was strayed. I rescued him who was plundered. When the Setiu waxed insolent to oppose the chieftains of the deserts, I counseled their movements. For this prince of the retinue caused me to pass many years as commander of his host. Every country against which I marched, when I made my assault, it was driven from its pastures and wells. I spoiled its cattle. I made captive its inhabitants. I took away their food. I slew people in it. By my strong arm, by my bow, by my movements, and by my excellent counsels, I found favor in his heart, and he loved me. He marked my bravery, and placed me even before his children, when he had seen that my hands prevailed. There came a mighty man of retinue, and flaunted me in my tent. He was a champion without a peer, and had subdued the whole of retinue. He vowed that he would fight with me. He planned to rob me. He plotted to spoil my cattle. By the counsel of his tribesfolk, the prince communed with me, and I said, I know him not. Forsooth, I am no confederate of his, nor one who strode about his encampment. Yet have I ever opened his door, or overthrown his fence. Nay, it is envy, because he sees me doing thy behest. Assuredly I am like a wandering bull in the midst of a strange herd, and the steer of those cattle charges him, a longhorn attacks him. Is there a humble man who is beloved in the condition of a master? There is no pedtee that makes cause with a man of the Delta. What can fasten the papyrus to the rock? Does a bull love combat? And shall then a stronger bull wish to sound the retreat through dread lest that one might equal him? If his heart be toward fighting, let him speak his will. Does God ignore what is ordained for him? Or knows he how the matter stands? At night time I strung my bow, and tried my arrows. I drew out my dagger and polished my weapons. Day dawned, and the retinue was already come. It had stirred up its tribes, and had assembled the countries of half of it. It had planned this fight. Forth he came against me where I stood, and I posted myself near him. Every heart burned for me. Women and men jabbered. Every heart was sore for me, saying, Is this another mighty man who can fight against him? Then his shield, his battle axe, and his armful of javelins fell. When I had escaped from his weapons, and had caused his arrows to pass by me, uselessly sped, while one approached the other, I shot him, my arrow sticking in his neck. He cried aloud, and fell on his nose. I laid him low with his own battle axe, and raised my shout of victory over his back. Every am shrieked. I gave thanks to Mantu, but his serfs mourned for him. This Prince Enshi, son of Amu, took me to his embrace. Then carried I off his possessions, and spoiled his cattle. What he had devised to do unto me, that did I unto him. I seized what was in his tent. I ransacked his encampment. I became great thereby. I grew large in my riches. I became abundant in my flocks. Thus God hath done, so as to shew mercy to him whom he had condemned, whom he had made wander to another land. For today is his heart satisfied. A fugitive fled in his season. Now the report of me is in the residence. A laggard lagged because of hunger. Now give I bread to my neighbor. A man left his country because of nakedness, but I am clad in white raiment and linen. A man sped for lack of one whom he should send, but I am a plenteous owner of slaves. Beautiful is my house, wide my dwelling place. The remembrance of me is in the palace. O God, whosoever thou art that didst ordain this fight, show mercy and bring me to the residence. Peradventure thou wilt grant me to see the place where my heart dwelleth. What matter is greater than that my corpse should be buried in the land wherein I was born? Come to my aid. A happy event has befallen. I have caused God to be merciful. May he do the like again, so as to ennoble the end of him he had abased, his heart grieving for him whom he had compelled to live abroad. If it so be that today he is merciful, may he hear the prayer of one afar off. May he restore him whom he had stricken to the place whence he took him. Oh, may the king of Egypt show mercy to me, that I may live by his mercy. May I salute the lady of the land who is in his palace. May I hear the behests of her children. Oh, let my flesh grow young again, for old age has befallen, feebleness has overtaken me. Mine eyes are heavy, my hands are weak, my legs refuse to follow, my heart is weary, and death approaches me. When they shall bear me to the city of eternity, let me serve my sovereign lady. Oh, let her discourse to me of her children's beauty. May she spend an eternity over me. Now it was told the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Keperkere, concerning this pass wherein I was. Thereupon his majesty sent to me with gifts of the royal bounty, and gladdened the heart of this his servant, as it had been the prince of any foreign country. And the royal children who were within his palace caused me to hear their behests. Copy of the decree which was brought to the humble servant concerning his return to Egypt. Horus, life of births. Two goddesses, life of births. King of Upper and Lower Egypt. Keperkere, son of Re. Sesostris, living for ever and ever. A royal decree unto the henchman Sinuhe. Behold, this decree of the king is brought to thee to instruct thee as following. Thou hast traversed the foreign lands, and art gone forth from Kedmi to retinue. Land gave thee to land. Self-consoled by thine own heart, what hadst thou done that aught should be done against thee? Thou hadst not blasphemed, that thy word should be reproved. Thou hadst not spoken in the council of the nobles, that thy utterances should be banned. This determination, it seized thine own heart, it was not in my heart against thee. This thy heaven, who is in the palace, is established and prospereth daily. She hath her part in the kingship of the land, her children are at the court. Mayest thou long enjoy the goodly things that they shall give thee. Mayest thou live by their bounty. Come now to Egypt, that thou mayest see the residence where thou didst grow, that thou mayest kiss the earth of the great portals, and have thy lot among the companions. For today already thou hast begun to be old, thy manhood is spent. Bethink thee of the day of burial, the passing into beatitude. How that the night shall be devoted to thee with ointment, with bandages from the hands of Tait, and a funeral procession shall be made for thee on a day of joining the earth. The mummy shell of gold, with head of lazuli, and a heaven above thee, and thou placed upon the hearse, oxen dragging thee, musicians in front of thee. And there shall be performed a dance of the Muu at the door of thy tomb, and the offering list shall be invoked for thee, and slaughterings made beside thy stele, thy columns being shapen of white stone amid the tombs of the royal children. Thus shalt thou not die abroad. Amu shall not escort thee. Shalt thou not be placed in a sheepskin when thy mound is made? Yea, all these things shall fall to the ground. Wherefore think of thy corpse and come. This decree reached me as I stood in the midst of my tribesfolk. It was read aloud to me, and I laid me on my belly and touched the soil. I strewed it on my hair, and I went about my encampment rejoicing and saying, how should such things be done to a servant whom his heart led astray to barbarous lands? Fair in sooth is the graciousness which delivereth me from death, inasmuch as thy Ka will grant me to accomplish the ending of my body at home. Copy of the acknowledgment of this decree. The servant of the Harim Sinuhe says, fair hail, discerned is this flight that thy servant made in his witlessness, yea, even by thy Ka, thou good God, Lord of the two lands, whom Re loves and Mantu, Lord of Thebes, praises, Amun, Lord of Karnak, Sob, Re, Horus, Hathor, Atum with his Ennead, Sopdu, Neferbayu, Semseru, Horus of the East, the Lady of Imet, who rests on thy head, the conclave upon the waters, Min in the midst of the deserts, Wereret, Lady of Punt, Har Ure, and all the gods of Timori and of the islands of the sea. They give life and strength to thy nose. They endue thee with their gifts. They give to thee eternity illimitable, time without bourne. The fear of thee is bruited abroad in cornlands and desert hills. Thou hast subdued all the circuit of the sun. This thy servant's prayer to his Lord to rescue him in the west. The Lord of perception, who perceiveth lowly folk. He perceived it in his noble palace. Thy servant feared to speak it. Now it is like some grave circumstance to repeat it. Thou great God, peer of Re, in giving discretion to one toiling for himself, this thy servant is in the hand of a good counselor in his behoof. Verily I am pleased beneath his guidance. For thy majesty is the victorious Horus, thy hands are strong against all lands. Let now thy majesty cause to be brought Maki from Kedmi, Kentiaosh from Kentkesh, Menus from the lands of the Fenku. They are renowned princes who have grown up in love of thee, albeit unremembered. Retinue is thine, like to thy hounds. But as touching this thy servant's flight, I planned it not, it was not in my heart, I conceived it not, I know not what sundered me from my place. It was the manner of a dream, as when a Delta man sees himself in Elephantine, a man of the marshes in Ta Seti. I had not feared, none had pursued after me, I had heard no reviling word, my name had not been heard in the mouth of the herald. Nay, but my body quivered, my feet began to scurry, my heart directed me. The God who ordained this flight drew me away. Yet I am not stiff-backed, inasmuch as suffering the fear of a man that knows his land. For Re has set the fear of thee throughout the land, the dread of thee in every foreign country. Whether I be at home, or whether I be in this place, it is thou that canst obscure you horizon. The sun riseth at thy pleasure, the water in the rivers is drunk at thy will, the air in heaven is breathed at thy word. Thy servant will hand over the viziership which thy servant hath held in this place. But let thy majesty do as pleaseth thee. Men live by the breath that thou givest. Re, Horus, and Hathor, love this thy august nose, which Mantu, lord of Thebes, wills shall live eternally. Envoys came to this servant, and I was suffered to spend a day in Yaa, to hand over my possessions to my children, my eldest son taking charge of my tribe, all my possessions being in his hand, my serfs and all my cattle, my fruit, and every pleasant tree of mine. Then came this humble servant southward, and halted at the pass of Horus. The commander who was there, in charge of the frontier patrol, sent a message to the residents to bear tidings, and his majesty sent a trusty head fowler of the palace, having with him ships laden with presents of the royal bounty for the Setiu that were with me to conduct me to the pass of Horus. And I named each several one of them by his name. Brewers kneaded and strained in my presence, and every serving man made busy with his task. Then I set out and sailed until I reached the town of Ichtol. And when the land was lightened and it was morning, there came men to summon me, 10 coming and 10 going, to convey me to the palace. And I pressed my forehead to the ground between the sphinxes, the royal children standing in the gateway against my coming. The companions that had been ushered into the forecourt showed me the way to the hall of audience. And I found his majesty on a throne in a gateway of gold. And I stretched myself on my belly, and my wit forsook me in his presence, albeit this god greeted me joyously. Yea, I was like a man caught in the dusk. My soul fled, my flesh quaked, and my heart was not in my body, that I should know life from death. Thereupon his majesty said to one of those companions, "Raise him up, let him speak to me." And his majesty said, "Lo, thou art come. Thou hast trodden the deserts, thou hast traversed the wastes. Eld has prevailed against thee. Thou hast reached old age. It is no small matter that thy corpse should be buried without escort of Petiu. But do not thus, staying ever speechless when thy name is pronounced." But verily I feared punishment, and answered him with the answer of one afraid. "What speaketh my lord to me? Would I might answer it, and may not. Lo, it is the hand of God, yea, the dread that is in my body. like that which caused this fateful flight. Behold, I am in thy presence. Thine is life. May thy majesty do as pleaseth thee. The royal children were caused to be ushered in. Then his majesty said to the royal consort, Behold Sinue, who is come as I am, an offspring of Setiu folk. She gave a great cry, and the royal children shrieked out all together. And they said to his majesty, It is not really he, O sovereign my lord. And his majesty said, Yea, it is really he. Then brought they their necklaces, their rattles, and their sistra, and presented them to his majesty. Thy hands be on the Beatus One, O enduring king, on the ornament of the Lady of Heaven. May Nub give life to thy nose. May the Lady of the Stars join herself to thee. Let the goddess of Upper Egypt fare north, and the goddess of Lower Egypt fare south, united and conjoined in the name of thy majesty. May the uraeus be set upon thy brow. Thou hast delivered thy subjects out of evil. May Re, Lord of the land, show thee grace. Hail to thee, and also to our sovereign lady. The horn of thy bow is slaked, thine arrow loosed. Give breath to one that is stifled, and grant us our goodly guerdon in the person of this Sheikh sea mate, the Penti born in T. Murray. He fled through fear of thee, he left this land through dread of thee. But as for the face of him who sees thy majesty, it blenches not. As for the eye that regardeth thee, it fears not. Then said his majesty, Nay, but he shall not fear, he shall not dread, for he shall be a companion among the magistrates, he shall be set in the midst of the nobles. Get you gone to the chamber of adornment to wait upon him. So when I was gone forth from the hall of audience, the royal children giving me their hands, we went together to the great portals, and I was placed in the house of a royal son. There was noble equipment in it, a bathroom, and painted devices of the horizon. Costly things of the treasury were in it. Garments of royal stuff were in every chamber. Unguent and fine oil of the king and of the courtiers whom he loves, and every serving man made busy with his task. Years were caused to pass away from my flesh. I was shaved and my hair was combed. A burden was given over to the desert and clothing to the sandfarers. And I was clad in soft linen and anointed with fine oil. By night I lay upon a bed. I gave up the sand to them that dwell therein, and oil of wood to him who smears himself with it. There was given to me the house of a provincial governor, such as a companion may possess. Many artificers built it, and all its woodwork was new appointed. And meals were brought to me from the palace 3 times, yea 4 times a day, over and above that which the royal children gave, without remiss. And there was constructed for me a tomb of stone in the midst of the tombs. The masons that hewed tombs marked out its ground plan. The master draughtsmen designed it, the master sculptors carved in it, and the master architects who are in the necropolis bestowed their care upon it. And all the gear that is placed in a tomb shaft went to its equipment, and cost servants were given to me. And there was made for me a sepulchral garden, in which were fields, in front of my abode, even as is done for a chief companion. And my statue was overlaid with gold, and its apron was of real gold. It was his majesty caused it to be made. There is no poor man for whom the like hath been done, and I enjoyed the favors of the royal bounty until the day of death came. End of the tale of Sinue.
Filboid Studge, The Story of a Mouse That Helped. "I want to marry your daughter," said Marks Bailey with faltering eagerness. "I am only an artist with an income of 200 a year, and she is the daughter of an enormously wealthy man, so I suppose you will think my offer a piece of presumption." Duncan Dullamy, the great company inflator, showed no outward sign of displeasure. As a matter of fact, he was secretly relieved at the prospect of finding even a 200 a year husband for his daughter Leonore. A crisis was rapidly rushing upon him, from which he knew he would emerge with neither money nor credit. All his recent ventures had fallen flat, and flattest of all had gone the wonderful new breakfast food, Pepenta, on the advertisement of which he had sunk such huge sums. It could scarcely be called a drug in the market. People bought drugs, but no one bought Pepenta. "Would you marry Leonore if she were a poor man's daughter?" asked the man of phantom wealth. "Yes," said Mark, wisely avoiding the error of over protestation; and to his astonishment Leonore's father not only gave his consent, but suggested a fairly early date for the wedding. "I wish I could show my gratitude in some way," said Mark, with genuine emotion. "I'm afraid it's rather like the mouse proposing to help the lion." "Get people to buy that beastly muck," said Dullamy, nodding savagely at a poster of the despised Pepenta, "and you'll have done more than any of my agents have been able to accomplish." "It wants a better name," said Mark reflectively, "and something distinctive in the poster line. Anyway, I'll have a shot at it." 3 weeks later, the world was advised of the coming of a new breakfast food, heralded under the resounding name of Filboid Studge. Spaley put forth no pictures of massive babies springing up with fungus-like rapidity under its forcing influence, or of representatives of the leading nations of the world scrambling with fatuous eagerness for its possession. One huge somber poster depicted the damned in hell suffering a new torment from their inability to get at the Filboid Studge which elegant young fiends held in transparent bowls just beyond their reach. The scene was rendered even more gruesome by a subtle suggestion of the features of leading men and women of the day in the portrayal of the lost souls, prominent individuals of both political parties. Society hostesses, well-known dramatic authors and novelists, and distinguished aeroplanists were dimly recognizable in that doomed throng. Noted lights of the musical comedy stage flickered wanly in the shades of the Inferno, smiling still from force of habit, but with the fearsome smiling rage of baffled effort. The poster bore no fulsome allusions to the merits of the new breakfast food, but a single grim statement ran in bold letters along its base: "They cannot buy it now." Spaley had grasped the fact that people will do things from a sense of duty which they would never attempt as a pleasure. There are thousands of respectable middle class men who, if you found them unexpectedly in a Turkish bath, would explain in all sincerity that a doctor had ordered them to take Turkish baths. If you told them in return that you went there because you liked it, they would stare in pained wonder at the frivolity of your motive. In the same way, whenever a massacre of Armenians is reported from Asia Minor, every one assumes that it has been carried out under orders from somewhere or another. No one seems to think that there are people who might like to kill their neighbors now and then. And so it was with the new breakfast food. No one would have eaten Filboid Studge as a pleasure, but the grim austerity of its advertisement drove housewives in shoals to the grocers' shops to clamor for an immediate supply. In small kitchens, solemn pig-tailed daughters helped depressed mothers to perform the primitive ritual of its preparation. On the breakfast tables of cheerless parlors it was partaken of in silence. Once the womenfolk discovered that it was thoroughly palatable. Their zeal in forcing it on their households knew no bounds. "You haven't eaten your Filboid Studge!" would be screamed at the appetiteless clerk as he hurried weariedly from the breakfast table, and his evening meal would be prefaced by a warmed up mess which would be explained as "your Filboid Studge that you didn't eat this morning." Those strange fanatics who ostentatiously mortify themselves inwardly and outwardly with health biscuits and health garments, battened aggressively on the new food. Earnest, spectacled young then devoured it on the steps of the National Liberal Club. A bishop who did not believe in a future state preached against the poster, and a peer's daughter died from eating too much of the compound. A further advertisement was obtained when an infantry regiment mutinied and shot its officers rather than eat the nauseous mess. Fortunately, Lord Birrell of Blatherstone, who was War Minister at the moment, saved the situation by his happy epigram that "discipline to be effective must be optional." Filboid Studge had become a household word, but Dullamy wisely realized that it was not necessarily the last word in breakfast dietary. Its supremacy would be challenged as soon as some yet more unpalatable food should be put on the market. There might even be a reaction in favor of something tasty and appetizing, and the Puritan austerity of the moment might be banished from domestic cookery. At an opportune moment, therefore, he sold out his interests in the article which had brought him in colossal wealth at a critical juncture, and placed his financial reputation beyond the reach of cavil. As for Leonore, who was now an heiress on a far greater scale than ever before, he naturally found her something a vast deal higher in the husband market than a 200 a year poster designer. Mark Spayley, the brain mouse who had helped the financial lion with such untoward effect, was left to curse the day he produced the wonder working poster. "After all," said Clovis, meeting him shortly afterwards at his club, "you have this doubtful consolation, that 'tis not in mortals to countermand success." End of Filboid Studge, The Story of a Mouse That Helped, by Saki.
The Sphinx Without a Secret, by Oscar Wilde. One afternoon I was sitting outside the Café de la Paix, watching the splendour and shabbiness of Parisian life, and wondering over my vermouth at the strange panorama of pride and poverty that was passing before me, when I heard someone call my name. I turned round and saw Lord Murchison. We had not met since we had been at college together nearly 10 years before, so I was delighted to come across him again, and we shook hands warmly. At Oxford we had been great friends. I had liked him immensely. He was so handsome, so high-spirited, and so honourable. We used to say of him that he would be the best of fellows if he did not always speak the truth, but I think we really admired him all the more for his frankness. I found him a good deal changed. He looked anxious and puzzled, and seemed to be in doubt about something. I felt it could not be modern scepticism, for Murchison was the stoutest of Tories, and believed in the Pentateuch as firmly as he believed in the House of Peers. So I concluded that it was a woman, and asked him if he was married yet. "I don't understand women well enough," he answered. "My dear Gerald," I said, "women are meant to be loved, not to be understood." "I cannot love where I cannot trust," he replied. "I believe you have a mystery in your life, Gerald," I exclaimed. "Tell me about it." "Let us go for a drive," he answered. "It is too crowded here. No, not a yellow carriage, any other colour. There, that dark green one will do." And in a few moments we were trotting down the boulevard in the direction of the Madeleine. "Where shall we go to?" I said. "Oh, anywhere you like," he answered. "To the restaurant in the Bois. We will dine there, and you shall tell me all about yourself." "I want to hear about you first," I said. "Tell me your mystery." He took from his pocket a little silver-clasped morocco case and handed it to me. I opened it. Inside there was the photograph of a woman. She was tall and slight, and strangely picturesque with her large, vague eyes and loosened hair. She looked like a clairvoyant, and was wrapped in rich furs. "What do you think of that face?" he said. "Is it truthful?" I examined it carefully. It seemed to me the face of someone who had a secret, but whether that secret was good or evil I could not say. Its beauty was a beauty moulded out of many mysteries, the beauty, in fact, which is psychological, not plastic. and the faint smile that just played across the lips was far too subtle to be really sweet. "Well," he cried impatiently, "what do you say?" "She is the Gioconda in sables," I answered. "Let me know all about her." "Not now," he said, "after dinner," and began to talk of other things. When the waiter brought us our coffee and cigarettes, I reminded Gerald of his promise. He rose from his seat, walked 2 or 3 times up and down the room, and, sinking into an armchair, told me the following story. "One evening," he said, "I was walking down Bond Street about 5 o'clock. There was a terrific crush of carriages, and the traffic was almost stopped. Close to the pavement was standing a little yellow brougham, which for some reason or other attracted my attention. As I passed by, there looked out from it the face I showed you this afternoon. It fascinated me immediately. All that night I kept thinking of it, and all the next day. I wandered up and down that wretched row, peering into every carriage, and waiting for the yellow brougham, but I could not find ma belle inconnue, and at last I began to think she was merely a dream. About a week afterwards I was dining with Madame de Rastel. Dinner was for 8 o'clock, but at 8:30 we were still waiting in the drawing-room. Finally the servant threw open the door and announced Lady Allroy. It was the woman I had been looking for. She came in very slowly, looking like a moonbeam in grey lace, and, to my intense delight, I was asked to take her in to dinner. After we had sat down, I remarked quite innocently, "I think I caught sight of you in Bond Street some time ago, Lady Allroy." She grew very pale, and said to me in a low voice, "Pray do not talk so loud, you may be overheard." I felt miserable at having made such a bad beginning, and plunged recklessly into the subject of the French plays. She spoke very little, always in the same low musical voice, and seemed as if she was afraid of someone listening. I fell passionately, stupidly in love, and the indefinable atmosphere of mystery that surrounded her excited my most ardent curiosity. When she was going away, which she did very soon after dinner, I asked her if I might call and see her. She hesitated for a moment, glanced round to see if anyone was near us, and then said, "Yes, tomorrow at 4:45. I begged Madame de Rastel to tell me about her, but all that I could learn was that she was a widow with a beautiful house in Park Lane, and as some scientific bore began a dissertation on widows, as exemplifying the survival of the matrimonially fittest, I left and went home. The next day I arrived at Park Lane punctual to the moment, but was told by the butler that Lady Allroy had just gone out. I went down to the club quite unhappy and very much puzzled, and after long consideration wrote her a letter, asking if I might be allowed to try my chance some other afternoon. I had no answer for several days, but at last I got a little note saying she would be at home on Sunday at 4, and with this extraordinary postscript: "Please do not write to me here again. I will explain when I see you." On Sunday she received me, and was perfectly charming, but when I was going away she begged of me, if I ever had occasion to write to her again, to address my letter to Mrs. Knox, care of Whittaker's Library, Green Street. There are reasons, she said, why I cannot receive letters in my own house. All through the season I saw a great deal of her, and the atmosphere of mystery never left her. Sometimes I thought she was in the power of some man, but she looked so unapproachable that I could not believe it. It was really very difficult for me to come to any conclusion, for she was like one of those strange crystals that one sees in museums, which are at one moment clear and at another clouded. At last I determined to ask her to be my wife. I was sick and tired of the incessant secrecy that she imposed on all my visits, and on the few letters I sent her. I wrote to her at the library to ask if she could see me the following Monday at 6. She answered yes, and I was in the 7th heaven of delight. I was infatuated with her, in spite of the mystery, I thought then. In consequence of it, I see now. No, it was the woman herself I loved. The mystery troubled me, maddened me. Why did chance put me in its track? "You discovered it then?" I cried. "I fear so," he answered. "You can judge for yourself." When Monday came round, I went to lunch with my uncle, and about 4 o'clock found myself in the Marylebone Road. My uncle, you know, lives in Regent's Park. I wanted to get to Piccadilly, and took a short cut through a lot of shabby little streets. Suddenly I saw in front of me Lady Allroy, deeply veiled and walking very fast. On coming to the last house in the street, she went up the steps, took out a latchkey, and let herself in. Here is the mystery, I said to myself, and I hurried on and examined the house. It seemed a sort of place for letting lodgings. On the doorstep lay her handkerchief, which she had dropped. I picked it up and put it in my pocket. Then I began to consider what I should do. I came to the conclusion that I had no right to spy on her, and I drove down to the club. At 6 I called to see her. She was lying on a sofa in a tea gown of silver tissue looped up by some strange moonstones that she always wore. She was looking quite lovely. "I am so glad to see you," she said. "I have not been out all day." I stared at her in amazement, and pulling the handkerchief out of my pocket, handed it to her. "You dropped this in Cumnor Street this afternoon, Lady Allroy," I said very calmly. She looked at me in terror, but made no attempt to take the handkerchief. "What were you doing there?" I asked. "What right have you to question me?" she answered. "The right of a man who loves you," I replied. "I came here to ask you to be my wife." She hid her face in her hands and burst into floods of tears. "You must tell me," I continued. She stood up and, looking me straight in the face, said, "Lord Murchison, there is nothing to tell you." "You went to meet someone," I cried. "This is your mystery." She grew dreadfully white and said, "I went to meet no one." "Can't you tell the truth?" I exclaimed. "I have told it," she replied. I was mad, frantic. I don't know what I said, but I said terrible things to her. Finally, I rushed out of the house. She wrote me a letter the next day. I sent it back unopened, and started for Norway with Alan Colville. After a month, I came back, and the first thing I saw in the Morning Post was the death of Lady Allroy. She had caught a chill at the opera, and had died in 5 days of congestion of the lungs. I shut myself up and saw no one. I had loved her so much, I had loved her so madly. Good God, how I had loved that woman! "You went to the street?" "To the house in it?" I said. "Yes," he answered. "One day I went to Cumnor Street. I could not help it. I was tortured with doubt. I knocked at the door, and a respectable-looking woman opened it to me. I asked her if she had any rooms to let. 'Well, sir,' she replied, 'the drawing-rooms are supposed to be let, but I have not seen the lady for 3 months, and as rent is owing on them, you can have them.' 'Is this the lady?' I said, showing the photograph. 'That's her, sure enough,' she exclaimed. 'And when is she coming back, sir?' 'The lady is dead,' I replied. 'Oh, sir, I hope not,' said the woman. 'She was my best lodger. She paid me 3 guineas a week merely to sit in my drawing-rooms now and then.' 'She met someone here,' I said, but the woman assured me that it was not so, that she always came alone, and saw no one. 'What on earth did she do here?' I cried. 'She simply sat in the drawing-room, sir, reading books, and sometimes had tea,' the woman answered. I did not know what to say, so I gave her a sovereign and went away. Now, what do you think it all meant? You don't believe the woman was telling the truth?' 'I do.' 'Then why did Lady Allroy go there?' 'My dear Gerald,' I answered, 'Lady Allroy was simply a woman with a mania for mystery. She took these rooms for the pleasure of going there with her veil down, and imagining she was a heroine. She had a passion for secrecy, but she herself was merely a sphinx without a secret.' 'Do you really think so?' 'I am sure of it,' I replied. He took out the morocco case, opened it, and looked at the photograph. 'I wonder,' he said at last. End of The Sphinx Without a Secret, by Oscar Wilde.
A Holiday in Bed and Other Sketches by J. M. Barrie. Recording by Rachel Novotny, Black Forest, Germany. A Holiday in Bed. Now is the time for a real holiday. Take it in bed if you are wise. People have tried a holiday in bed before now and found it a failure, but that was because they were ignorant of the rules. They went to bed with the open intention of staying there, say 3 days, and found to their surprise that each morning they wanted to get up. This was a novel experience to them. They flung about restlessly and probably shortened their holiday. The proper thing is to take your holiday in bed with a vague intention of getting up in another quarter of an hour. The real pleasure of lying in bed after you are awake is largely due to the feeling that you ought to get up. To take another quarter of an hour then becomes a luxury. You are, in short, in the position of the man who dined on larks. Had he seen the hundreds that were ready for him, all set out on one monster dish, they would have turned his stomach, but getting them 2 at a time, he went on eating till all the larks were exhausted. His feeling of uncertainty as to whether these might not be his last 2 larks is your feeling that perhaps you will have to get up in a quarter of an hour. Deceive yourself in this way, and your holiday in bed will pass only too quickly. Sympathy is what all the world is craving for, and sympathy is what the ordinary holiday-maker never gets. How can we be expected to sympathise with you when we know you are off to Perthshire to fish? No, we say we wish we were you, and forget that your holiday is sure to be a hollow mockery, that your child will jam her finger in the railway carriage and scream to the end of the journey, that you will lose your luggage, that the guard will notice your dog beneath the seat and insist on its being paid for, that you will be caught in a Scotch mist up on top of a mountain and be put on gruel for a fortnight, that your wife will fret herself into a fever about the way the servant, who has been left at home, is carrying on with her cousins, the milkman and the policeman, and that you will be had up for trespassing. Yet, when you tell her you are off tomorrow, we have never the sympathy to say, "Poor fellow, I hope you'll pull through somehow." If it is an exhibition you go to gape at, we never picture you dragging your weary legs from one department to another and wondering why your back is so sore. Should it be the seaside, we talk heartlessly to you about the briny, though we must know, if we would stop to think, that there is one holiday more miserable than all the others. It is that spent at the seaside, when you wander the weary beach and fling pebbles at the sea, and wonder how long it will be till dinner time. Were we to come down to see you, we would probably find you not on the beach, but moving slowly through the village, looking in at one milliner's window, or laboriously reading what the one grocer's labels say on the subject of pale ale, compressed beef, or vinegar. There was never an object that called aloud for sympathy more than you do, but you get not a jot of it. You should take the first train home and go to bed for 3 days. To enjoy your holiday in bed to the full, you should let it be vaguely understood that there is something amiss with you. Don't go into details, for they are not necessary, and besides you want to be dreamy more or less, and the dreamy state is not consistent with a definite ailment. The moment one takes to bed he gets sympathy. He may be suffering from a tearing headache or a tooth that makes him cry out, but if he goes about his business, or even flops in a chair, true sympathy is denied him. Let him take to bed with one of those illnesses of which he can say with accuracy that he is not quite certain what is the matter with him, and his wife, for instance, will want to bathe his brow. She must not be made too anxious. That would not only be cruel to her, but it would wake you from the dreamy state. She must simply see that you are not yourself. Women have an idea that unless men are not themselves, they will not take to bed, and as a consequence your wife is tenderly thoughtful of you. Every little while she will ask you if you are feeling any better now, and you can reply, with the old regard for truth, that you are much about it. You may even, for your own pleasure, talk of getting up now, when she will earnestly urge you to stay in bed until you feel easier. You consent. Indeed, you are ready to do anything to please her. The ideal holiday in bed does not require the presence of a ministering angel in the room all day. You frequently prefer to be alone, and point out to your wife that you cannot have her trifling with her health for your sake, and so she must go out for a walk. She is reluctant, but finally goes, protesting yet that you are the most unselfish of men, and only too good for her. This leaves a pleasant aroma behind it, for even when lying in bed, we like to feel that we are uncommonly fine fellows. After she has gone, you get up cautiously and walk stealthily to the wardrobe, produce from the pocket of your greatcoat a good novel. A holiday in bed must be arranged for beforehand. With a gleam in your eye, you slip back to bed, double your pillow to make it higher, and begin to read. You have only got to the 4th page when you make a horrible discovery, namely that the book is not cut. An experienced holiday-maker would have cut the night before. But this is your first real holiday, or perhaps you have been thoughtless. In any case, you have now matter to think of. You are torn in 2 different ways. There is your coat on the floor with a knife in it, but you cannot reach the coat without getting up again. Ought you to get the knife or to give up reading? Perhaps it takes a quarter of an hour to decide this question, and you decide it by discovering a 3rd course. Being a sort of an invalid, you have certain privileges which would be denied you if you were merely sitting in a chair in the agonies of neuralgia. One of the glorious privileges of a holiday in bed is that you are entitled to cut books with your fingers. So you cut the novel in this way and read on. Those who have never tried it may fancy that there is a lack of incident in a holiday in bed. There could not be a more monstrous mistake. You are in the middle of a chapter when suddenly you hear a step on the stair. Your loving ears tell you that your wife has returned and is hastening to you. Now what happens? The book disappears beneath the pillow, and when she enters the room softly, you are lying there with your eyes shut. This is not merely incident, it is drama. What happens next depends on circumstances. She says in a low voice, "Are you feeling any easier now, John?" No answer. "Oh, I believe he is sleeping." Then she steals from the room, and you begin to read again. During a holiday in bed, one never thinks, of course, of analysing his actions. If you had done so, in this instance, you would have seen that you pretended to sleep because you had got to an exciting passage. You love your wife, but wife or no wife, you must see how the passage ends. Possibly the little scene plays differently, as thus. "John, are you feeling any easier now?" No answer. "Are you asleep?" No answer. "Oh, what a pity. I don't want to waken him, and yet the fowl will be spoilt." Is that you back, Marian?" "Yes, dear. I thought you were asleep." "No, only thinking." "You think too much, dear. I have cooked a chicken for you." "I have no appetite." "Ach, I'm sorry, but I can give it to the children." "Oh, as it's cooked, you may as well bring it up." In that case, the reason of your change of action is obvious. But why do you not let your wife know that you have been reading? This is another matter that you never reason about. Perhaps it is because of your craving for sympathy, and you fear that if you were seen enjoying a novel in the bed, sympathy would go. Or perhaps it is that a holiday in bed is never perfect without a secret. Monotony must be guarded against, and so long as you keep the book to yourself, your holiday in bed is a healthy excitement. A stolen book, as we may call it, is like stolen fruit, sweeter than what you can devour openly. The boy enjoys his stolen apple because at any moment he may have to slip it down the leg of his trousers and pretend that he has merely climbed the tree to enjoy the scenery. You enjoy your book doubly because you feel that it is a forbidden pleasure. Or do you conceal the book from your wife lest she should think that you are over-exerting yourself? She must not be made anxious on your account. Ah, that is it. People who pretend, for it must be pretence, that they enjoy their holiday in a country, explain that the hills or the sea give them such an appetite. I could never find myself feel the delight of being able to manage an extra herring for breakfast, but it should be pointed out that neither mountains nor oceans give you such an appetite as a holiday in bed. What makes people eat more anywhere is that they have nothing else to do. And in bed you have lots of time for meals. As for the quality of the food supplied, there is no comparison. In the Highlands it is ham and eggs all day till you sicken. At the seaside it is fish till the bones stick in your mouth. But in bed, oh, there you get something worth eating. You don't take 3 big meals a day, but 12 little ones, and each time it is something different from the last. There are delicacies for breakfast, for your 4 luncheons and your 5 dinners. You explain to your wife that you have lost your appetite, and she believes you. But at the same time she has the sense to hurry on your dinner. At the clatter of dishes, for which you have been lying listening, you raise your poor head and say faintly, "Really, Marian, I can't touch food." "But this is nothing," she says, "only the wing of a partridge." You take a side glance at it and see that there is also the other wing and the body and 2 legs. Your alarm thus dispelled, you say, "I really can't." "But dear, it's so beautifully cooked." "Yes, but I have no appetite." "But try to take it, John, for my sake." Then for her sake you take. You say she can leave it on the chair, and perhaps you will just taste it. As soon as she has gone, you devour that partridge, and when she comes back, she has the sense to say, "Why, you've scarcely eaten anything. What could you take for supper?" You say you can take nothing, but if she likes, she can cook a large sole, only you won't be able to touch it. "Poor dear," she says, "your appetite has completely gone." And then she rushes to the kitchen to cook the sole with her own hands. In half an hour she steals into your room with it, and then you, who have been wondering why she is such a time, start up protesting. "I hope, Marian, this is nothing for me. Only the least little bit of a sole, dear. But I told you I could eat nothing." "Well, this is nothing. It's so small." You look again and see with relief that it is a large sole. "I would much rather that you took it away." "But dear, I tell you I have no appetite." "Of course I know that, but how can you hope to preserve your strength if you eat so little? You've had nothing all day." You glance at her face to see if she is in earnest, for you can remember 3 breakfasts, 4 luncheons, 2 dinners, and sandwiches between, but evidently she is not jesting. Then you yield. "Oh well, to keep my health up, I must just put a fork into it." "Do, dear, it will do you good, though you have no caring for it." Take a holiday in bed, if only to discover what an angel your wife is. There is only one thing to guard against. Never call it a holiday. Continue not to feel sure what is wrong with you and to talk vaguely of getting up presently. Your wife will suggest calling in the doctor, but pooh-pooh him. Be firm on that point. The chances are that he won't understand your case. End of A Holiday in Bed by J.M. Barrie.
The Man Who Would Manage by Jerome K. Jerome. It has been told me by those in a position to know, and I can believe it, that at 19 months of age he wept because his grandmother would not allow him to feed her with a spoon, and that at 3 1/2 he was fished in an exhausted condition out of the water butt, whither he had climbed for the purpose of teaching a frog to swim. 2 years later he permanently injured his left eye, showing the cat how to carry kittens without hurting them, and about the same period was dangerously stung by a bee while conveying it from a flower where, as it seemed to him, it was only wasting its time, to one more rich in honey-making properties. His desire was always to help others. He would spend whole mornings explaining to elderly hens how to hatch eggs, and would give up an afternoon's blackberrying to sit at home and crack nuts for his pet squirrel. Before he was 7 he would argue with his mother upon the management of children, and reprove his father for the way he was bringing him up. As a child, nothing could afford him greater delight than minding other children, or them less. He would take upon himself this harassing duty entirely of his own accord, without hope of reward or gratitude. It was immaterial to him whether the other children were older than himself or younger, stronger or weaker. Whenever and wherever he found them, he set to work to mind them. Once, during a school treat, piteous cries were heard coming from a distant part of the wood, and upon search being made, he was discovered prone upon the ground, with a cousin of his, a boy twice his own weight, sitting upon him and steadily whacking him. Having rescued him, the teacher said, "Why don't you keep with the little boys? What are you doing along with him?" "Please, sir," was the answer, "I was minding him." He would have minded Noah if he had got hold of him. He was a good-natured lad, and at school he was always willing for the whole class to copy from his slate. Indeed, he would urge them to do so. He meant it kindly, but inasmuch as his answers were invariably quite wrong, with a distinctive and inimitable wrongness peculiar to himself, the result to his followers was eminently unsatisfactory, and with the shallowness of youth that, ignoring motives, judges solely from results, they would wait for him outside and punch him. All his energies went to the instruction of others, leaving none for his own purposes. He would take callow youths to his chambers and teach them to box. "Now try and hit me on the nose," he would say, standing before them in an attitude of defence. "Don't be afraid. Hit as hard as ever you can." And they would do it. And so soon as he had recovered from his surprise, and a little lessened the bleeding, he would explain to them how they had done it all wrong, and how easily he could have stopped the blow if they had only hit him properly. Twice at golf he lamed himself for over a week showing a novice how to drive, and at cricket on one occasion I remember seeing his middle stump go down like a ninepin just as he was explaining to the bowler how to get the balls in straight. After which he had a long argument with the umpire as to whether he was in or out. He has been known, during a stormy Channel passage, to rush excitedly upon the bridge in order to inform the captain that he had just seen a light about 2 miles away to the left, and if he is on the top of an omnibus, he generally sits beside the driver and points out to him the various obstacles likely to impede their progress. It was upon an omnibus that my own personal acquaintanceship with him began. I was sitting behind 2 ladies when the conductor came up to collect fares. One of them handed him a 6pence, telling him to take to Piccadilly Circus, which was 2pence. "No," said the other lady to her friend, handing the man a shilling. "I owe you 6pence. You give me 4pence, and I'll pay for the 2." The conductor took the shilling, punched 2 twopenny tickets, and then stood trying to think it out. "That's right," said the lady who had spoken last. "Give my friend 4pence." The conductor did so. "Now you give that 4pence to me." The friend handed it to her. "And you," she concluded to the conductor, "give me 8p. Then we shall be all right." The conductor doled out to her the 8p., the 6p. He had taken from the first lady, with a penny and 2 halfpennies out of his own bag, distrustfully, and retired, muttering something about his duties not including those of a lightning calculator. "Now," said the elder lady to the younger, "I owe you a shilling." I deemed the incident closed, when suddenly a florid gentleman on the opposite seat called out in stentorian tones, "Hi, conductor! You've cheated these ladies out of 4p." "Who's cheated who out of 4p?" replied the indignant conductor from the top of the steps. "It was a twopenny fare." "2 twopences don't make 8p," retorted the florid gentleman hotly. "How much did you give the fellow, my dear?" he asked, addressing the first of the young ladies. "I gave him 6p," replied the lady, examining her purse. "And then I gave you 4p, you know," she added, addressing her companion. "That's a dear 2 pennies," chimed in a common-looking man on the seat behind. "Oh, that's impossible, dear," returned the other, "because I owed you 6p to begin with." "But I did," persisted the first lady. "You gave me a shilling," said the conductor, who had returned, pointing an accusing forefinger at the elder of the ladies. The elder lady nodded. "And I gave you 6p and 2 pennies, didn't I?" The lady admitted it. "And I give her," he pointed towards the younger lady, "4p, didn't I?" "Which I gave you, you know, dear," remarked the younger lady. "Blow me if it ain't me as has been cheated out of the 4p," cried the conductor. "But," said the florid gentleman, "the other lady gave you 6p." "Which I give to her," replied the conductor, again pointing the finger of accusation at the elder lady. "You can search my bag if you like. I ain't got a bloomin' 6p on me." By this time everybody had forgotten what they had done, and contradicted themselves and one another. The florid man took it upon himself to put everybody right, with the result that before Piccadilly Circus was reached 3 passengers had threatened to report the conductor for unbecoming language. The conductor had called a policeman and had taken the names and addresses of the 2 ladies, intending to sue them for the 4p, which they wanted to pay, but which the florid man would not allow them to do. The younger lady had become convinced that the elder lady had meant to cheat her, and the elder lady was in tears. The florid gentleman and myself continued to Charing Cross Station. At the booking-office window it transpired that we were bound for the same suburb, and we journeyed down together. He talked about the 4p all the way. At my gate we shook hands, and he was good enough to express delight at the discovery that we were near neighbours. What attracted him to myself I failed to understand, for he had bored me considerably, and I had, to the best of my ability, snubbed him. Subsequently I learned that it was a peculiarity of his to be charmed with any one who did not openly insult him. 3 days afterwards he burst into my study unannounced. He appeared to regard himself as my bosom friend, and asked me to forgive him for not having called sooner, which I did. "I met the postman as I was coming along," he said, handing me a blue envelope, "and he gave me this for you." I saw it was an application for the water rate. "We must make a stand against this," he continued. "That's for water to the 29th September. You've no right to pay it in June." I replied to the effect that water rates had to be paid, and that it seemed to me immaterial whether they were paid in June or September. "That's not it," he answered. "It's the principle of the thing. Why should you pay for water you have never had? What right have they to bully you into paying what you don't owe?" He was a fluent talker, and I was ass enough to listen to him. By the end of half an hour he had persuaded me that the question was bound up with the inalienable rights of man, and that if I paid that 14 and 10 in June instead of in September, I should be unworthy of the privileges my forefathers had fought and died to bestow upon me. He told me the company had not a leg to stand upon, and at his instigation I sat down and wrote an insulting letter to the chairman. The secretary replied that, having regard to the attitude I had taken up, it would be incumbent upon themselves to treat it as a test case, and presumed that my solicitors would accept service on my behalf. When I showed him this letter he was delighted. "You leave it to me," he said, pocketing the correspondence, "and we'll teach them a lesson." I left it to him. My only excuse is that at the time I was immersed in the writing of what in those days was termed a comedy drama. The little sense I possessed must, I suppose, have been absorbed by the play. The magistrate's decision somewhat damped my ardour, but only inflamed his zeal. Magistrates, he said, were muddle-headed old fogies. This was a matter for a judge. The judge was a kindly old gentleman, and said that, bearing in mind the unsatisfactory wording of the sub-clause, he did not think he could allow the company their costs, so that, all told, I got off for something under £50, inclusive of the original 14 and 10. Afterwards our friendship waned, but living as we did in the same outlying suburb, I was bound to see a good deal of him and to hear more. At parties of all kinds he was particularly prominent, and on such occasions, being in his most good-natured mood, was most to be dreaded. No human being worked harder for the enjoyment of others, or produced more universal wretchedness. One Christmas afternoon, calling upon a friend, I found some 14 or 15 elderly ladies and gentlemen trotting solemnly round a row of chairs in the centre of the drawing-room, while Poppleton played the piano. Every now and then Poppleton would suddenly cease, and every one would drop wearily into the nearest chair, evidently glad of a rest, all but one, who would thereupon creep quietly away, followed by the envying looks of those left behind. I stood by the door watching the weird scene. Presently an escaped player came towards me, and I inquired of him what the ceremony was supposed to signify. "Don't ask me," he answered grumpily. "Some of Poppleton's damned tomfoolery." Then he added savagely, "We've got to play forfeits after this." The servant was still waiting a favourable opportunity to announce me. I gave her a shilling not to, and got away unperceived. After a satisfactory dinner he would suggest an impromptu dance, and want you to roll up mats or help him move the piano to the other end of the room. He knew enough round games to have started a small purgatory of his own. Just as you were in the middle of an interesting discussion or a delightful tête-à-tête with a pretty woman, he would swoop down upon you with, "Come along, we're going to play literary consequences," and dragging you to the table and putting a piece of paper and a pencil before you, would tell you to write a description of your favourite heroine in fiction, and would see that you did it. He never spared himself. It was always he who would volunteer to escort the old ladies to the station, and who would never leave them until he had seen them safely into the wrong train. He it was who would play wild beasts with the children and frighten them into fits that would last all night. So far as intention went, he was the kindest man alive. He never visited poor sick persons without taking with him in his pocket some little delicacy calculated to disagree with them and make them worse. He arranged yachting excursions for bad sailors entirely at his own expense, and seemed to regard their subsequent agonies as ingratitude. He loved to manage a wedding. Once he planned matters so that the bride arrived at the altar 3/4 of an hour before the groom, which led to unpleasantness upon a day that should have been filled only with joy. And once he forgot the clergyman. But he was always ready to admit when he made a mistake. At funerals also he was to the fore, pointing out to the grief-stricken relatives how much better it was for all concerned that the corpse was dead, and expressing a pious hope that they would soon join it. The chiefest delight of his life, however, was to be mixed up in other people's domestic quarrels. No domestic quarrel for miles round was complete without him. He generally came in as mediator, and finished as leading witness for the appellant. As a journalist or politician, his wonderful grasp of other people's business would have won for him esteem. The error he made was working it out in practice. End of The Man Who Would Manage, by Jerome K. Jerome. Recording by Ruth Golding.
Tony's Wife, by Alice Dunbar. "Give me 5 cents worth of candy, please." It was the little Jew girl who spoke, and Tony's wife roused herself from her knitting to rise and count out the multi-hued candy which should go in exchange for the dingy nickel grasped in warm, damp fingers. 3 long sticks, carefully wrapped in crispest brown paper, and a half-dozen or more of pink candy fish for lagniappe, and the little Jew girl sped away in blissful contentment. Tony's wife resumed her knitting with a stifled sigh until the next customer should come. A low growl caused her to look up apprehensively. Tony himself stood beetle-browed and huge in the small doorway. "Get up from there," he muttered, "and open 2 dozen oysters right away. The Elliots want 'em." His English was unaccented. It was long since he had seen Italy. She moved meekly behind the counter and began work on the thick shells. Tony stretched his long neck up the street. "Mr. Tony, mamma wants some charcoal." The very small voice at his feet must have pleased him, for his black brows relaxed into a smile, and he poked the little one's chin with a hard, dirty finger, as he emptied the ridiculously small bucket of charcoal into the child's bucket, and gave a banana for lagniappe. The cracking of shells went on behind, and a stifled sob arose as a bit of sharp edge cut into the thin, worn fingers that clasped the knife. "Hurry up there, will you?" growled the black brows. "The Elliots are sending for the oysters." She deftly strained and counted them, and, after wiping her fingers, resumed her seat and took up the endless crochet work with her usual stifled sigh. Tony and his wife had always been in this same little queer old shop on Prytania Street, at least to the memory of the oldest inhabitant of the neighborhood. When or how they came, or how they stayed, no one knew. It was enough that they were there, like a sort of ancestral fixture to the street. The neighborhood was fine enough to look down upon these 2 tumble-down shops at the corner, kept by Tony and Mrs. Murphy the grocer. It was a semi-fashionable locality, far up town, away from the old-time French Quarter. It was the sort of neighborhood where millionaires live before their fortunes are made, and fashionable, high-priced private schools flourish, where the small cottages are occupied by aspiring school teachers and choir singers. Such was this locality, and you must admit that it was indeed a condescension to tolerate Tony and Mrs. Murphy. He was a great, black‐bearded, hoarse‐voiced, 6 foot specimen of Italian humanity, who looked in his little shop and on the prosaic pavement of Prytania Street somewhat as Hercules might seem in a modern drawing‐room. You instinctively thought of wild mountain passes and the gleaming dirks of bandit contadini in looking at him. What his last name was, no one knew. Someone had maintained once that he had been christened Antonio Malatesta, but that was unauthentic, and as little to be believed as that other wild theory that her name was Mary. She was meek, pale, little, ugly, and German. Altogether part of his arms and legs would have very decently made another larger than she. Her hair was pale and drawn in sleek, thin tightness away from a pinched, pitiful face, whose dull cold eyes hurt you, because you knew they were trying to mirror sorrow and could not because of their expressionless quality. No matter what the weather or what her other toilet, she always wore a thin little shawl of dingy brick‐dust hue about her shoulders. No matter what the occasion or what the day, she always carried her knitting with her, and seldom ceased the incessant twist, twist of the shining steel among the white cotton meshes. She might put down the needles and lace into the spool box long enough to open oysters, or wrap up fruit and candy, or count out wood and coal into infinitesimal portions, or do her housework. But the knitting was snatched with avidity at the first spare moment, and the worn, white, blue‐marked fingers, half enclosed in kid‐glove stalls for protection, would writhe and twist in and out again. Little girls just learning to crochet borrowed their patterns from Tony's wife, and it was considered quite a mark of advancement to have her inspect a bit of lace done by eager, chubby fingers. The ladies in larger houses, whose husbands would be millionaires some day, bought her lace and gave it to their servants for Christmas presents. As for Tony, when she was slow in opening his oysters or in cooking his red beans and spaghetti, he roared at her and prefixed picturesque adjectives to her lace, which made her hide it under her apron with a fearsome look in her dull eyes. He hated her in a lusty, roaring fashion, as a healthy, beefy boy hates a sick cat and torments it to madness. When she displeased him, he beat her, and knocked her frail form on the floor. The children could tell when this had happened. Her eyes would be red, and there would be blue marks on her face and neck. "Poor Mrs. Tony," they would say, and nestle close to her. Tony did not roar at her for petting them, perhaps because they spent money on the multi‐hued candy in glass jars on the shelves. Her mother appeared upon the scene once, and stayed a short time, but Tony got drunk one day and beat her because she ate too much, and she disappeared soon after. Whence she came and where she departed, no one could tell, not even Mrs. Murphy, the Pauline Pry and Gazette of the block. Tony had gout, and suffered for many days in roaring helplessness, the while his foot, bound and swathed in many folds of red flannel, lay on the chair before him. In proportion as his gout increased, and he bawled from pure physical discomfort, she became light‐hearted, and moved about the shop with real brisk cheeriness. He could not hit her then without such pain that after 1 or 2 trials he gave up in disgust. So the dull years had passed, and life had gone on pretty much the same for Tony and the German wife and the shop. The children came on Sunday evenings to buy the stick candy and on week-days for coal and wood. The servants came to buy oysters for the larger houses, and to gossip over the counter about their employers. The little dry woman knitted, and the big man moved lazily in and out in his red flannel shirt, exchanged politics with the tailor next door through the window, or lounged into Mrs. Murphy's bar and drank fiercely. Some of the children grew up and moved away, and other little girls came to buy candy and eat pink lagniappe fishes, and the shop still thrived. One day Tony was ill, more than the mummified foot of gout or the wheeze of asthma. He must keep his bed and send for the doctor. She clutched his arm when he came and pulled him into the tiny room. Is it anything much, doctor?" she gasped. Aesculapius shook his head as wisely as the occasion would permit. She followed him out of the room into her shop. Will he get well, doctor?" Aesculapius buttoned up his frock coat, smoothed his shining hat, cleared his throat, then replied oracularly, "Madam, he is completely burned out inside. Empty as a shell, madam, empty as a shell. He cannot live, for he has nothing to live on." As the cobblestones rattled under the doctor's equipage rolling leisurely up Prytania Street, Tony's wife sat in her chair and laughed with a hearty joyousness that lifted the film from the dull eyes and disclosed a sparkle beneath. The drear days went by, and Tony lay like a veritable Samson shorn of his strength, for his voice was sunk into a hoarse, sibilant whisper, and his black eyes gazed fiercely from the shock of hair and beard about a white face. Life went on pretty much as before in the shop. The children paused to ask how Mr. Tony was, and even hushed the jingles of their bell hoops as they passed the door. Red-headed Jimmy, Mrs. Murphy's nephew, did the hard jobs, such as splitting wood and lifting coal from the bin, and in the intervals between tending the fallen giant and waiting on the customers, Tony's wife sat in her accustomed chair, knitting fiercely, with an inscrutable smile about her purple compressed mouth. Then John came, introducing himself, serpent-wise, into the Eden of her bosom. John was Tony's brother, huge and bluff too, but fair and blond, with the beauty of northern Italy. With the same lack of race pride which Tony had displayed in selecting his German spouse, John had taken unto himself Betty, a daughter of Erin, aggressive, powerful, and cross-eyed. He turned up now, having heard of this illness, and assumed an air of remarkable authority at once. A hunted look stole into the dull eyes, and after John had departed with blustering directions as to Tony's welfare, she crept to his bedside timidly. "Tony," she said, "Tony, you're very sick." An inarticulate growl was the only response. "Tony, you ought to see the priest. You mustn't go any longer without taking the sacrament." The growl deepened into words. "Don't want any priest. You're always after some sniveling old woman's fuss. You and Mrs. Murphy go on with your church. It won't make you any better." She shivered under this parting shot, and crept back into the shop. Still the priest came next day. She followed him into the bedside and knelt timidly. "Tony," she whispered, "here's Father Leblanc." Tony was too languid to curse out loud. He only expressed his hate in a toss of the black beard and shaggy mane. "Tony," she said nervously, "won't you do it now? It won't take long, and it will be better for you when you go. Oh, Tony, don't laugh. Please, Tony, here's the priest." But the Titan roared aloud. "No, get out! Think I'm a going to give you a chance to grab my money now? Let me die and go to hell in peace." Father Leblanc knelt meekly and prayed, and the woman's weak pleadings continued. Tony, I've been true and good and faithful to you. Don't die and leave me no better than before. Tony, I do want to be a good woman once, a real for true married woman. Tony, here's the priest. Say yes." And she wrung her ringless hands. "You want my money," said Tony slowly, "and you shan't have it. Not a cent. John shall have it." Father Leblanc shrank away like a fading spectre. He came next day, and next day, only to see reenacted the same piteous scene, the woman pleading to be made a wife ere death hushed Tony's blasphemies, the man chuckling in pain-racked glee at the prospect of her bereaved misery. Not all the prayers of Father Leblanc, nor the wailings of Mrs. Murphy, could alter the determination of the will beneath the shock of hair. He gloated in his physical weakness at the tenacious grasp on his mentality. "Tony," she wailed on the last day, her voice rising to a shriek in its eagerness, "tell them I'm your wife. It'll be the same. Only say it, Tony, before you die." He raised his head and turned stiff eyes and gibbering mouth on her. Then, with one chill finger pointing at John, fell back dully and heavily. They buried him with many honors by the Society of Italia's Sons. John took possession of the shop when they returned home, and found the money hidden in the chimney corner. As for Tony's wife, since she was not his wife after all, they sent her forth in the world penniless, her worn fingers clutching her bundle of clothes in nervous agitation, as though they regretted the time lost from knitting. End of Tony's Wife by Alice Dunbar.